Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. When I moved into my suburban neighborhood in early 2022, I expected peace and quiet. Instead, I walked into a petty dictatorship run by our HOA president, Richard. Richard was the worst kind of leader, the kind who loved power but hated accountability. He enforced ridiculous rules, like fining people $200 for leaving their trash cans out a minute past 9 o'clock a.m., but blatantly ignored the rules when it suited him. His own yard was a mess of unpermitted structures, and his fence was taller than allowed by city ordinances. But Richard's true sin? Using the HOA as his personal piggy bank. At first, I tried reasoning with him. My fence was slightly off color because the approved stain wasn't available, and he fined me $500. I explained, provided receipts, and asked for leniency. Rules are rules, Richard smirked, folding his arms across his chest. Maybe next time you'll plan ahead better. As he walked away, I called after him, "You know the approved vendor was back-ordered for 3 months, right?" He waved dismissively without turning around. That's when I decided I would take him down. Not with screaming or public arguments, but methodically, legally, and in a way he'd never recover from. Step 1. Become the inside man. Richard's first mistake was underestimating me. I volunteered for the HOA board under the guise of wanting to get involved in the community. I played the part of the eager, naive newbie perfectly. For 2 years, from 2022 to 2024, I attended every meeting, quietly observing how Richard operated. I learned he controlled the board by bullying other members and burying them in paperwork. He'd push through votes when only his allies were present and conveniently lose paperwork submitted by dissenting homeowners. During one particularly heated meeting in March 2023, I watched as he shut down Maria, a longtime resident. "But the playground equipment is literally falling apart," Maria protested. "My grandson got a splinter the size of a toothpick last week." Richard sighed dramatically. "As I've explained multiple times, we have budget constraints. If you'd like to propose a special assessment to fund playground repairs, feel free to submit the paperwork." "I did submit it. Twice," Maria countered. "Well, I never received it," he replied with a shrug. "Maybe try email next time." I kept my head down, took detailed notes, and waited. My goal was to outlast his term as president so I could begin making changes. Then I discovered Richard's second mistake. He wasn't just a bully, he was a thief. Step 2. Follow the money. Richard loved to brag about how he kept the HOA's finances in order. But something didn't add up. The annual HOA fees were high, much higher than in similar neighborhoods, but the common areas were falling apart. The pool was closed half the summer of 2023 due to maintenance issues, and the landscaping looked like it hadn't been touched in months. I started digging. As the HOA treasurer, Richard had access to all the accounts, but he was notoriously cagey about sharing financial details. I asked for the budget during a meeting, and Richard laughed it off. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it," he said with a condescending pat on my shoulder. "I've got it under control." I filed a formal request for the financial records, which, under HOA rules, he was required to provide. Weeks went by with no response. That's when I started talking to neighbors. Turns out, I wasn't the only one suspicious. Over a dozen homeowners had requested access to the budget over the years, only to be ignored. One neighbor, James, claimed Richard had used HOA funds to install a new patio at his house. "I'm a contractor myself," James told me over coffee in his kitchen. "That's at least a $10,000 job, and he did it right after we paid our special assessment for pool repairs. Funny timing, right?" Another neighbor, Priya, swore she'd seen Richard's kids at the community pool during its maintenance closure. "The pool wasn't broken," Priya insisted. "His kids were having a private party while the rest of us couldn't use it. My daughter was heartbroken." Armed with these suspicions, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, forcing Richard to provide the records. He stalled, but I wasn't backing down. Step 3. Build the case. When Richard finally handed over the financial documents in January 2024, they were a mess. Invoices were missing, payments were mislabeled, and some expenses were downright bizarre. A $15,000 landscaping fee paid to a company that didn't exist. Thousands spent on administrative costs with no explanation. I cross-referenced the HOA's bank statements with public records and found the smoking gun. Richard was funneling money to his personal accounts. Even better, I discovered Richard had been inflating contractor fees, pocketing the difference, and splitting the profits with his buddy Kevin, a shady contractor who handled most of the HOA's maintenance. I compiled everything into a detailed report, complete with spreadsheets, photos, and notarized statements from neighbors who had seen Richard's antics firsthand. "Are you sure you want to do this?" my wife asked one night as I worked late organizing the evidence. "Richard seems like the vindictive type." "That's exactly why I have to do this," I replied. "If not me, then who? He's stealing from all of us." Step 4. The coup. I waited for the annual HOA meeting in April 2024, which was typically a snooze fest attended by only a handful of homeowners. But this time, I made sure people showed up. I spent weeks knocking on doors, explaining what Richard had been up to. I didn't share everything, just enough to get people angry and curious. On the night of the meeting, the room was packed. Richard started the meeting like usual, droning on about how difficult it was to manage the HOA and how much he'd sacrificed for the community. That's when I stood up. I calmly asked if he could explain some discrepancies in the budget. Richard laughed nervously. "I don't think this is the time or place." "Actually, Richard," I replied, "it's the perfect time." I handed out copies of my report to everyone in the room. The mood shifted instantly. People started reading, whispering, and then shouting. "Is this true?" demanded Eleanor, a retiree who'd lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. "You charged us $5,000 for pool repairs that never happened?" "This is ridiculous," Richard sputtered, his face turning red. "These allegations are completely baseless." "Then explain why there's a payment to your brother-in-law's company that doesn't exist," I said, pointing to the specific line item in the report. Richard tried to regain control, banging his gavel on the table. "This meeting is adjourned!" "You can't adjourn what you no longer control," I said, standing firm. "I call for a vote to remove Richard as president. All in favor?" The room erupted with raised hands. By the end of the night, Richard was out. Step 5, the final blow. After Richard was removed, we hired an independent auditor to go through the HOA's finances. They confirmed everything. Richard had embezzled over $50,000, mismanaged tens of thousands more, and committed multiple counts of fraud. We reported him to the police and filed a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. "I can't believe we let this go on for so long," said Maria during our first post-Richard board meeting in May 2024. "We should have demanded transparency years ago." "Better late than never," I replied. "Now we make sure it never happens again." But it didn't end there. Kevin, Richard's shady contractor buddy, was also exposed and banned from doing business in the county. Richard had to sell his house to pay restitution and legal fees. His name became a running joke in the neighborhood and no one would touch him professionally. With Richard gone, we restructured the HOA to prevent another dictator from taking over. We implemented term limits, required multiple board members to approve financial decisions, and created an online portal so all homeowners could access budgets and meeting minutes. The aftermath. Every time I walk past Richard's old house, now owned by a lovely family, I smile. The pool is open, the landscaping is beautiful, and the HOA fees are lower than ever. Richard, meanwhile, moved to a neighboring town where he reportedly tried to join another HOA board only to be laughed out of the room when someone Googled his name. "Hey, did you hear about Richard?" my neighbor James asked as we were both mowing our lawns last weekend. "Apparently, he tried claiming he was forced out by radical elements in our neighborhood." I laughed. The only radical element was his accounting. Justice wasn't just served, it was plated, garnished, and savored. The next one is an entitled people story. When I bought my property about 15 years ago, it came with a beautiful old barn that had been standing there since the early 1900s. The place was perfect for my needs. I had chickens, a couple of goats, and used the barn for woodworking projects. The property was just outside city limits in an unincorporated area, which meant fewer restrictions and more freedom to do what I wanted with my land. For over a decade, everything was peaceful. My neighbors were great people who minded their own business. We'd wave to each other, help out when someone needed a hand, and generally lived the quiet rural life we'd all chosen. The barn was grandfathered in under every possible regulation you could think of, and I had all the documentation to prove it. Then, the new HOA president moved in 3 houses down. Let me back up a bit. Our little neighborhood didn't originally have an HOA. It was formed about 8 years ago when some of the newer residents wanted to maintain property values and preserve the character of the neighborhood. I wasn't thrilled about it, but the rules were pretty reasonable at first. Keep your grass mowed, don't paint your house neon pink, basic stuff. The annual dues were minimal and the HOA mostly stayed out of everyone's way. That all changed when this guy took over as president. I'll call him the president since we're keeping things anonymous. This man had moved from some upscale suburban development and apparently thought he could transform our rural neighborhood into his previous cookie-cutter community. Within his first month, he started sending out violation notices for things that had never been issues before. Someone's fence was the wrong shade of white. Another neighbor's vegetable garden was unsightly. It was ridiculous. Then he set his sights on my barn. I came home from work one day to find a certified letter taped to my front door. The letter informed me that my barn was in violation of county zoning regulations and HOA covenants. According to the president, agricultural structures required special zoning permits in our area, and my barn didn't have the proper documentation. I had 30 days to either produce the correct permits or remove the structure entirely. I laughed at first because it was so absurd. The barn had been there for over a century. I had a literal stack of paperwork proving its legal status, including the grandfather clause that protected it from modern zoning requirements. I sent copies of everything to the HOA with a polite letter explaining that the barn was completely legal and properly documented. 2 weeks later, I got another certified letter. The president had apparently consulted with someone at the county zoning office who told him that grandfather clauses could be challenged if the structure's use had significantly changed over the years. Since the barn was now used for chickens, goats, and woodworking rather than its original purpose of housing dairy cattle, he argued that the grandfather protection no longer applied. He gave me another 30 days to remove the barn or face daily fines of $500. I was furious but tried to stay calm. I made an appointment with the county zoning department to sort this out in person. That's when things got interesting. The zoning office was understaffed and disorganized, which wasn't surprising for our small rural county. The clerk who helped me pulled up all my property records and confirmed what I already knew. My barn was completely legal, properly documented, and the grandfather clause was solid. The change in use didn't matter because agricultural purposes were agricultural purposes regardless of what specific animals or activities were involved. But here's where it got weird. The clerk mentioned that someone had indeed been calling the office repeatedly asking about my property and ways to challenge the barn's legal status. She seemed annoyed about it and let slip that the caller had been wasting their time with frivolous inquiries. I asked if there was any way the president could actually cause me legal trouble, and she assured me he couldn't. My documentation was airtight. Then, just making conversation while she was filing papers, she mentioned something that caught my attention. She said the zoning department actually owned a small parcel of land in our neighborhood that they'd acquired years ago for a planned utility easement project that never happened. The county had been trying to sell it for years, but hadn't found a buyer because it was an awkward shape and size, just a narrow strip of land that wasn't useful for much. I asked where this parcel was located, and when she showed me on the map, I nearly fell out of my chair. It was the strip of land directly between my property and the president's house. About a quarter acre running right along his property line. An idea started forming in my mind. I asked how much the county wanted for the land. She pulled up the listing and told me they were asking $12,000, but would probably take less just to get it off their books. It had been sitting unsold for almost 6 years. I bought that land the next week. The county was thrilled to finally unload it, and I got it for $9,000 after a quick negotiation. The whole process took less than 10 days because the county was motivated to sell, and there were no complications with the title. Now here's where my malicious compliance came in. I started researching what I could legally do with my new parcel. Since it was zoned for agricultural use, just like my main property, I had quite a few options. I also discovered something beautiful in our county code. There was a provision that said if you owned adjacent agricultural parcels, you could apply for a consolidated agricultural designation that came with certain protections and benefits, including exemptions from HOA oversight on agricultural activities. I filed for the consolidated designation and got it approved within 3 weeks. My property, including the new strip of land, was now officially classified as a consolidated agricultural operation. According to county law, this meant the HOA couldn't regulate my agricultural activities or structures as long as they complied with county codes, which my barn obviously did. But I didn't stop there. The narrow strip of land I'd bought ran along the president's property line. I decided to put it to good use. I applied for permits to build a small equipment storage structure on my new land, right on the edge closest to his property. Everything was completely legal and properly permitted. I also expanded my chicken operation, building a nice large chicken run that extended onto the new parcel. The president noticed the survey stakes and construction permits posted on the new property within days. He came storming over one evening, his face red with anger. He demanded to know what I was doing, and I calmly explained that I'd purchased the adjacent parcel and was making improvements to my expanded agricultural operation. He tried to claim I needed HOA approval for any construction. I showed him the consolidated agricultural designation and the county code that exempted me from HOA oversight on agricultural matters. He sputtered something about getting his lawyer involved and stomped off. A week later, I received yet another certified letter. This one informed me that the HOA was fining me for unauthorized construction and expansion of non-conforming use. I responded with copies of my permits, my consolidated agricultural designation, and a letter from a real estate attorney I'd consulted explaining that the HOA had no authority over my agricultural operations under county law. Here's where it gets even better. Remember how the president's whole crusade started with him claiming my barn wasn't properly zoned? Well, I decided to do some research into his property. Turns out he had a shed in his backyard that was about 6 inches over the property setback line. Technically a violation of county code, but the kind of thing that usually gets ignored because it's minor and wasn't hurting anyone. I didn't report it or anything petty like that. I didn't need to. Because when the county came out to do the final inspection on my new equipment storage building, the inspector noticed the president's setback violation while he was in the area. The inspector was required by law to document any violations observed during official site visits. The president got a notice from the actual county zoning enforcement office, not just the HOA, requiring him to either move his shed or apply for a variance. Moving the shed would cost thousands of dollars. Applying for a variance required fees, paperwork, and wasn't guaranteed to be approved. The president tried to fight it, claiming selective enforcement, but the county pointed out that they'd only noticed the violation because they were doing legitimate inspection work in the area. Nothing selective about it. But wait, there's more. The president's aggressive approach to HOA enforcement had made him plenty of enemies in the neighborhood. Once people saw that I'd successfully fought back against his overreach, others started pushing back too. Several neighbors filed complaints with the HOA board about the president's harassment and unreasonable interpretation of the rules. A few members of the board who'd been quietly uncomfortable with his tactics finally spoke up. The real kicker came during the next HOA meeting. One of the board members had done some research and discovered that the president's aggressive expansion of HOA authority into areas traditionally governed by county regulations could expose the HOA to liability issues. If the HOA was claiming authority to regulate things like agricultural structures that were explicitly under county jurisdiction, and homeowners faced financial harm because of incorrect HOA guidance, the HOA could be sued. The board didn't want that risk. They voted to revise the HOA covenants to explicitly state that agricultural operations in compliance with county regulations were outside HOA purview. They also voted to rescind all of the president's previous violation notices related to agricultural activities or structures, including my barn. The president tried to maintain control, but his support had evaporated. At the next election cycle, he wasn't re-elected. The vice president took over, a reasonable woman who believed in minimal HOA interference and focusing on actual community issues rather than personal crusades. As for my expanded agricultural operation, it's been thriving. The equipment storage building on the new parcel is incredibly useful. My chicken operation has grown, and I'm now selling eggs to several neighbors and at the local farmers market. The goats are happy with their expanded space, and my barn, the structure that started this whole mess, is still standing strong after more than 100 years. The former president had to pay several $1,000s to relocate his shed. Last I heard, he was trying to sell his house and move to a different neighborhood, preferably one with stricter HOA rules where his management style might be more appreciated. I don't think he's found a buyer yet. Turns out that having a property right next to an expanded agricultural operation with chickens and goats isn't everyone's dream location. Who knew? The best part about all of this is that I never technically did anything wrong. I didn't violate any rules, break any laws, or act in bad faith. I simply bought a piece of property that was legally for sale, followed all proper procedures for its use, and exercised my rights as a property owner. The president demanded strict adherence to zoning regulations, so I gave him exactly that. Complete, total, absolute compliance with every zoning rule and regulation, just in a way he never anticipated. My favorite moment was running into him at the hardware store a few months after everything settled down. He saw me, and I could see him debating whether to say anything. I just gave him a friendly nod and continued shopping for fence posts. I was expanding the goat enclosure again, you see. All properly permitted, of course. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the best response to unreasonable demands is complete and total compliance with the actual rules, not the rules someone wishes existed. The president wanted everything done by the book. I gave him the whole library, and as it turned out, the book was on my side all along. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened around about 20 years ago, but I just got reminded about recently. Myself and 6 friends were heading to watch the Rugby Scotland versus Ireland at Murrayfield in Edinburgh. A great bunch of lads, 2 Irish and the rest Scots. As is tradition, we would do a pre-game pub crawl working our way to the stadium. It was a cold, wet, miserable day. Typical Edinburgh winter. But that didn't stop us. We wrapped up warm. One of the establishments was an ex-serviceman club right across from Haymarket train station. Not usually open to the public, but when there was going to be nearly 70,000 worth of fans walking past, they wanted a piece of it. We went in and it was stowed out, shoulder to shoulder. So, myself and Dave, a lad from Tyrone, were volunteered to go to the bar to get the beers in. It took nearly 10 minutes to get to the bar. Lots of fans in winter clothing made it that little bit tighter. We got there in the end, parched though. "Hello there," I said in my usual jovial and convivial way. "Can I please have—" The barman, a short, red-faced man, with a neat mustache and a regimental tie, showed the palm of his hand in a stop gesture. "I'll stop you there. I am not serving you until you take off your hat." I thought he was joking, so I proceeded to start ordering. The barman just said hat. Now I looked around. About 80% of the people were in hats, including the two old regulars who were snickering into their pints at the other end of the bar. The barman couldn't make it more obvious that this was some sort of power play. "What's wrong with Grumpy Bollocks over there? He didn't ask anyone else to take their hat off?" asked Dave. Even the guy beside me at the bar commented that the barman was being an arse. Usually I would have told the barman to duck off, but I had a better idea. I removed my hat. "Sorry about that," I said in a friendly and subservient tone. I proceeded to order 7 pints for me and my friends. He placed the beer on the bar. His face wore the smuggest countenance I have ever seen. "Actually, since it took us so long to get to the bar, I will double up." 14 pints were neatly placed upon a tray. "You know, it's cold out there, so I'll get us all a dram. Come to think about it, make them doubles." Now there was 14 pints and 7 double whiskeys lined up. "And sorry about the hat thing. Get yourself one too." Without any form of thanks, he turned around and poured himself a double whiskey. It was down his throat before he got to the till to ring up the order. It was when he turned around that he realized that we had left the bar. "Where are you going? Who's going to pay for these?" he shouted after us. I just turned around, smiled, and placed my hat back on my head. "Bastard!" he yelled at the top of his voice getting even redder. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Backstory. I live in a town in the Netherlands with a university, and a few years ago my GF's cousin got accepted as an overseas student. My GF is Japanese. Her family, father, mother, her sister, and herself, moved to the Netherlands while she was younger. Her cousin still lived in Japan when she applied, got accepted, and is now living in a student room in the Netherlands. We don't really have dorms here like in the US, but the building she lives in is maintained by the university itself. Said cousin is doing quite well for herself, got good grades, and is well on her way to get her diploma. Partly because of this, the overseas family decided to have their vacation in the Netherlands this year, both for leisure and a bit of a family gathering. This story takes place during the family gathering. My GF's parents and the cousin's parents, plus yet another family, had a meeting in a restaurant in my hometown. They had 2 little kids in tow, sisters. These looked like 8 or 9 or so to me, but my GF later told me that they are actually 11 and 12, but did look younger than they were, probably also because of their school uniform. At least that's what it looked like to me. I really don't know. Anyway, the idea was to catch up with the family, and my GF was asked if she would be willing to keep the 2 young kids busy for a few hours since she was the oldest of the lot. My GF and me are in our 40s, her studying cousin is around 25, and as said, the 2 kids are around 10, 11 and 12. My GF didn't mind, but did ask me if I wanted to come along as well. Her cousin didn't mind. The 3 of us had met a few times before already, and, well, it was all about keeping the young kids busy anyway. Oh, for the record, the 2 young kids basically only speak Japanese. They do understand bits of English, and can even speak some, but it's mostly Japanese. My GF's cousin speaks both Japanese and English, and has even learned quite a bit of the Dutch language as well. Seriously, for the few years she's been here, it's IMO quite impressive. My GF speaks Japanese, English, and Dutch, and as for me, Dutch, obviously, and English, but over the years I also managed to pick up a decent bit of Japanese as well, and I can often, not always, understand the general gist of things as long as it's not too quickly spoken or too complicated, so basically it was all English and Japanese between us. A bully shows up. We took the kids for a walk through my hometown, and they were quite interested, but when we went past a playground, that also quickly got their attention. So the 3 of us decided to go sit on a bench and let the kids have some fun. There were several activities like an air balloon castle, swings, a sandbox for younger kids to play in, just plenty of things to do. The 2 wanted to go into the castle, which was fine with my GF as long as they made sure to only use the entrance exit, which was located on our side so that they wouldn't get lost and we could keep track of them. The 3 of us talked quite a bit but also kept eyes on the castle. So, Around 15 or so minutes later, I spot the two again by accident near the exit with a little kid in between them. I have no idea, but I'd say she was around 8 or so. I can't really tell exactly what's going on, but I did see the kid point to the area of the sandbox, and that's where the three of them headed next. Before I can say anything to my GF, a young lady walks up to us and asks, in Dutch, if we have seen a little girl passing by. This seems way too coincidental to me, so I ask, is she wearing a pink dress by any chance? The woman's face lights up as I tell her that she seems to be with my GF's younger cousins, and I point to the sandbox. But when we look over, we now also see an older boy near the girls. I'm not good with guessing ages, let's just say that he was bigger than them. And he's clearly harassing them. The small girl is visibly crying, but also comforted by one of the two younger cousins while the other is keeping the boy away from her. We all walk over to the sandbox just when the boy manages to shove one of the cousins out of his way, and he's clearly trying to bully the young girl in the pink dress, but now stopped by the other cousin, which is when we arrive. The woman who is with us berates the boy and tells him to stop picking on young children, but the little brat clearly isn't very impressed. The incident. Next moment his mother, so I assume, storms over yelling, and she has every appearance of a Karen, or a talkie, as we tend to call them over here. A little argument ensues, mainly between the mother of the girl in the pink dress and our Karen talkie. It goes back and forth, but it's apparent that according to his mother, the brat did nothing wrong by picking on a girl half his own size, and this fine example of a mother even has the audacity to blame the other mother for raising such a weak little C-word. Basically, dat krijg je ervan als je domme huppel katjes opvoedt. And then the Karen says, kids will be kids, just let them sort out their own problems already. But she does take the boy with her as she walks away. The mother gets ready to grab her kid and leave, but in the meantime the girl has completely calmed down and is actually having a great time with the two cousins. Unknown to anyone else yet at this time, my GF decides to comply with the earlier suggestion. First, she asks the mother to reconsider leaving because the kids are having so much fun together. My GF also comments how amazing kids are because they clearly don't speak the same language, yet they seem to understand each other just fine and are having a good time. The mother agrees, and my GF now addresses both her cousins in Japanese. And it sounded very serious to me, something about the tone, the way she talked, and also looked at both girls, even a bit sternly. They both nodded and clearly said, hey, aka yes ma'am. I think I even saw a small head bow, but I'm not too sure. Our little group goes to sit on a bench nearby, and for the next 5 minutes nothing happens. We're just having some small talk. Then the bully returns. The mother of the small girl wanted to stand up, but gets stopped by my GF, who tells her that she has nothing to worry about because her kid is completely safe. Just watch. Trust me on this. The mother is visibly uneasy, but does remain seated. Which is when I noticed that the behavior and stance of the two cousins has completely changed. They seem much more confident and relaxed. The boy starts making a fuss, while one of the cousins stands up, points to him, and yells something at him, in Japanese, obviously. He, once again, tries to shove her out of his way, but this time, she's faster. She steps aside, does something with her leg, and gives him a huge shove. Next moment, he's eating sand. No, literally. He gets up visibly angry while his face is covered in sand. This time, he becomes violent and actually tries to hit one of the cousins with his fists. Yeah, tries. She evades one attempt, then grabs his hand, spins it around, and the next moment, the boy finds his arm twisted behind his back, and he starts screaming. The other cousin now also stands up, pats the young girl on her head, makes another move, and once again the boy gets shoved to the ground, this time by both cousins. Hard. When he looks up, the other cousin actually makes a moving gesture as if she wants to kick him, but without actually moving her legs or anything. She's obviously just threatening him. My GF pokes me with a huge grin on her face and tells me, surely that deserves a point for self-restraint, don't you agree? She's visibly loving every moment of this. Apparently, the boy isn't totally stupid and he runs off, while one cousin immediately turns to the young girl again, who is clearly still having a good time, not at the least upset with the bully. What was dat in God's nom? The mother asks. Oh, sorry. What the hell was that? She asks. My GF tells the mother that her cousins are taking the same self-defense classes as she and her sister once did, and that she had decided to pull ranks by telling her cousins that it was okay for them to actually defend themselves, as long as they didn't overdo it, of course. The mother wanted to know more about these classes, but unfortunately for her, my GF had to tell her that the actual school was located all the way out in a suburb of Tokyo, so not something her daughter would be able to attend. Mommy returns with a boe, guard. We're chatting some more for the next 10 minutes, after which the bully's mother storms over to us with a boa in tow. Boa is Dutch for bewust ongeschickte ambtenaar, buitengewoon opsporingsambtenaar, which basically means so much as being a deputy but without the proper training nor having any weapons. Generally speaking, most of them usually handle ticketing people. He tells us that he has gotten a complaint from the woman about people beating up her kid, to which the mother of the young girl immediately snaps, "Whatever happened with letting the kids sort out their own problems?" Now, the funny thing is, apparently the whole spectacle didn't really go unnoticed, and before we could say or do anything, someone else had stormed over as well. "I saw the whole thing, officer," an older woman said. Her brat, pointing at the Karantaki, was harassing and beating the kid in the pink dress when those two awesome kids stepped in and protected her. Meanwhile, another man had walked over. "Officer, that brat got everything he deserved. He started it. The only thing that happened was that those girls defended themselves from him." The officer listened to everyone's statements and ended up deciding to ticket the mother of the brat. I assume for disturbing the peace, but I don't know any details because at this time we decided to leave and we went our separate ways. Aftermath. During our walk back to the hotel restaurant, the cousins told us the whole story, and I actually learned something new as well. While they were in the castle, they saw the boy harassing the young girl in the pink dress and immediately decided that this wasn't right, also because he was almost twice her size. He actually pulled on her hair while she was already crying, which made the cousins plain out angry. Cousins plain out angry, but the only thing they did was get the boy away from the girl. One cousin distracted the boy by blocking him from grabbing the girl's hair again, and she also started taunting him while the other comforted the young girl and led her to the exit, but the one we agreed on. So the girl's mother never saw her leave and got worried. The other cousin managed to lose the boy in the crowd, at first anyway, and she joined her sister near the exit. So I asked my GF why they didn't do all that stuff right away, to which she told me that they weren't allowed to. The first rule of self-defense is apparently always leave if you can, and her cousins are at a level where the use of these techniques outside their school is strictly prohibited, unless there's an actual threat, of course, or if they've been given direct permission by an elder of the same school. A rule which my GF was stretching a little bit, but she told me that she would write up the whole altercation so that the cousins could take her letter back with them. She was actually not kidding when she talked about points for self-restraint, because that would actually be her advice in the letter. But yeah, typical hypocrite behavior. Let the kids sort it out, until it suddenly doesn't go your way, eh? Anyway.